Generating traffic and sales can be a challenge for online merchants. But selling on the Walmart Marketplace puts your products in front of millions of customers who shop on Walmart.com. And right now, sellers who join Walmart Marketplace can save up to 50% on referral and fulfillment fees for the first 90 days. So get started today. Head over to marketplace.walmart.com/savings. That's marketplace.walmart.com/savings. Welcome to E-Commerce Conversations, a weekly podcast from Practical E-Commerce, hosted by entrepreneur Eric Bandholz.
What is going on, Internet? Eric Bandholz back again with another E-Commerce Conversations. I hope all is going well on the other side of the Internet. On the other side of the Internet from me, Chad. What's up?
What's up? Hey, how you doing?
How am I doing? I'm doing great, man. We're chatting. We're catching up. This is a good time.
Heck yeah.
I'm a little disappointed because Chad and I were going to do a podcast on a boat, and that was going to be my first boat recording podcast ever. But I took a Dramamine and I fell asleep. I just fell asleep on the boat.
That would have been awesome to record on the boat. You had all your stuff too.
Yeah. I brought it with me. But anyways, who are you? Tell the listeners who you are, what you're doing, what you also did in the past.
Well, I'm a father first. My son's 4. He'll be coming home on this podcast. I'm a little bit concerned. Currently, I'm reporting to you live from a place called Serenbe, which to me is as close as you can get to a commune or a kibbutz in America. It's an agrihood. And I'm here for a month with my family, and my son's going to camp from 9 to 3 here. But I think that's probably one thing that's, when you ask me who I am, it's father, yes. And my mission is really to elevate the human condition through experiences. And so one of those experiences that we had together was on my boat. And that really lights me up.
Yeah. How old is your boy?
He's 4.
Yeah. My boy will be 4 in March. So it's a fun age where the novelty of so many things in life, you get to experience it with them for the first time as well. It's a joy that I guess a lot of people don't see. You also built a business and sold that from an operational perspective.
Yeah, 3 businesses.
Oh.
I'm on to my 4th. So, so I would say the biggest one was this past April 21 was Skubana, which I think I probably tried to get you to use many, many times. Order management, inventory management, analytics platform for multi-channel sellers selling on Shopify and Amazon, right? We synchronize the inventory, print the shipping label. So think of ShipStation on steroids as the analogy. And I also started an Amazon conference called the Prosper Show with 3 other people. We sold that in 2019. And before that, I had a small agency as well. And even today, right now, I have an e-commerce business. So we make vacuum filters, coffee filters, you name it. And then I started an AI-driven repricer called Profasee. So I've got a lot going on in the e-com world. I've been doing it for 20 years. I've got the hair loss to prove it. All the scars, all the wounds, all the blood loss. And yeah, I'm excited to share that where this conversation goes.
Well, you might be one of the first guests who led off with that, you're a father. I tend to not hear that. So I want to lead off with that question. How do you balance the demands of a business and your expectations for being a good father? And what does that mean from a time and, quality investment into your child?
Yeah, so I'll say that I, as a human, come with a lot of baggage. So I didn't have a father that was very involved as a child. He had to work very, very hard. He had no time because he worked a job that was not remote, that was in person, and we could barely make rent or pay the mortgage or pay our grocery bills. So I'll give him some slack, but I didn't want that upbringing for my child. So one of the decisions after being so lit up having a child and bringing this miracle into the world was I don't ever want to make a trade-off, right? My son comes first in everything. And I'll tell you, it's a tug of war because this is my first new business that I'm working on that, I have a child involved, right? All my other companies were done in my 20s, early 30s. So there's constant tug of war, and it requires, rigor and discipline and adhering to blocking off my calendar and saying no.
Yeah. So a little more specifically, what does that look like? Do you say every single day of the week from, 9 to 11 is my quality time with my son? Or give me some insights on how you've optimized that and built that into your world?
Yep. So 7 a.m. he wakes up, and 7 to 9 is me and him time. So I do the morning routine. We do breakfast. Typically, it's breakfast tacos or breakfast burritos, and then I get him ready, and then he's off at 9 o'clock. And so now he comes back. He used to come back at about 12:30. Now he's coming back at about 3 o'clock, roughly. And typically, I stop working around 3 or 4. I do dinner. We play together, and then once he's in bed, I'll pick it back up if I need to.
So you're pretty much, when he's around, you're around, like 100% of the time.
Yeah, I try to be as present as possible. Like today, right? I'm making a trade-off. I've told my wife, I said, look, I'm taking this call from 3 to 4. I know I'm typically free and available, but he might be noisy downstairs, and we'll make it happen.
What kind of activities do you do to engage with him? Like, I'll say, like, me personally, like, I love children, but I can only be around them for so long before I need some adult time.
Yeah. And I'm, by the way, speaking about being alone or getting adult time, that's the trade-off, right? Because I'm trading off a lot of my like I'll work out, I'll get a nice CrossFit, a hit in, but outside of that, I probably am not enriching myself the way that I'd like to, right? In terms of listening to more podcasts, and like to me that lights me up, reading more books. So what do I do with him? I mean, it depends on different stages of where he's at in life. Like when he was younger, I used to wrap him up on my chest, and we used to go on my electric scooter, and I take him to the beach boardwalk in Hollywood, Florida, and ride around. Here, for example, like yesterday, there's a trampoline playground on this commune, and we went to this new trampoline that they built on like a little hilltop. So we hiked up the hilltop, and we went on the trampoline, and then we went into the sand pit and played. And I called a friend that's nearby, and I was like, hey, do you want to come? And they came. And so getting the kids together, and then the mom was there, and I was chatting with the mom, who happens to be in YPO. So I try to get involved in everything that he likes to do. So if he likes to play with the ollie ball, I play with the ollie ball.
Do you feel like, because I would say this is not something that's very common for a lot of parents to engage with their kids this much. Like, I have a different take on the world in the sense that, my view, and not to say one's right or wrong, I'm just kind of like sharing what I go through, and I want to get your take on it, because I think what you do is really interesting. Is like, my goal is to live the life that I want to live, knowing that my kids are seeing that and using that as a model for how they're going to experience life when they get older. So I want to say it's to the point of like neglect or anything, but it's definitely like I prioritize my fitness. Like, so if it's 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock or whatever, I got to get to the gym, lift weights, I'll lift weights, and he'll be there with me. Like, he'll hop on the rowing machine, or he'll lift some weights, some little 5-pound weights or something like that. And he'll be involved with me, but it's more kind of built around my life rather than the reverse of what you're doing, which is building around his life. Have you thought about like that strategy?
Well, firstly, I work out. I'll cut out my work day. So I work out from 9 to 10. So I cut that out. I appreciate your strategy. I think that, like, I know there's going to be a point in time where my son's going to say, Chad or Daddy, I don't want to play with you. Right? I already have friends. So I'm sort of investing this time from now, as I know I'm never going to get it back.
Yeah.
And I think to some degree, I think you're right, where like I am giving up a part of myself, which I think is selfless, to spend more time with him. And I think it's two different paths, and I don't think one path is the righteous one. I think they're just different.
No, I agree. I think it's both selfless and selfish, because you enjoy it, right? You want to do this if you were pulling your hair out and, like he was tearing down the house or lighting the house on fire, and you're, like, or whatever kids do, like, still.
Don't get me wrong. Sometimes it's not easy. Like, sometimes I'll have a meltdown and I'm just like, WTF, and like, what's going on? Or I'll yell, right? And I'll apologize for doing it. But yeah, it's kind of the path I chose. And like, I'll stand up and share that, like, hey, if I need some personal time, I'll speak my mind. I'll say, hey, I need to tap out right now. I need to go for a walk, read a book, listen to a podcast, smoke some hookah, whatever makes me happy.
Yeah. Do you find that because of this, you are like the primary parent to him? Does he come to you when, he falls and skins his knees, or does he go to your wife for that?
It's a mix, actually. It's a mix. My wife is more of an intuitive healer, so he typically comes to her for those healing challenges. But when it comes to building a train, or like playing with a ball or basketball or building Legos, like that's more my speed.
Yeah. So I think there's a theme for you, which is like this connection to people. You talked about elevating people and like how that's your journey. Like, how did you fall into this? Because it seems like your earlier businesses are about, like business and operations, and some of your businesses now too. But when you introduce yourself talking about elevate and creating an experience that I experienced like on your boat, and things like that, walk me through like how you found yourself in that direction.
It's a big question. That's a pressure question. Let's see. Well, firstly, when he was born, right, there was an identity shift for me. It was a very clear identity shift. So I was like, wait a minute, like I only used to care about, I obviously have a wife and I have my mom, my sister, intimate family, immediate family. But when he was born, I was like, oh my God, I have this like new person to deal with in my life. So that was a big identity shift for me that I struggled through. And it was just about that time that COVID was happening as well, which is when we picked up our entire house and moved to Florida. And something else happened though. I sold my business and I was already always doing these community things. Like I wanted to help people transcend. I wanted to help people connect. I also want people to be curious about each other and like even cultivate like positive heat, right? Talk about sex, politics, religion, the things that you shouldn't be talking about at the dinner table, I think are acceptable to talk about amongst anybody and actually harmoniously disagree. So I've always been having these sessions. I'd have people over at my house, I'd have founders over, I'd have entrepreneurs over. We'd always be connecting people. And then I sold my company and I hired a lot of coaches. So I became the CEO of myself. And then I did a psychedelic and that created a lot more awareness about what I was doing. And it was a very intentional experience that I had. And then it sort of put all these pieces of the puzzle together for me.
Yeah. I don't know if we've like gone down the psychedelic train on this podcast or not.
Okay.
No, I mean like I've also done a ayahuasca retreat myself, and kind of like my big takeaway was, like I am not like everybody else. I am my own person and the world needs people like me. So it's okay to be yourself. It's kind of like one of my lessons learned. If you're open talking about it, was this like an organized retreat? Was this just something that you're like, oh, hey, I heard this will be cool? Or one of the coaches brought it up to you?
So people have been bringing it up to me for a while, right? There's a Netflix special around psychedelics, and there's a book written about it that just became popular and a movement around it. I was super scared to do it. And there was an entrepreneur retreat that I went on where there was the optionality to do it. And it was going to be intentional. It was going to be done with like someone facilitating the experience. It wasn't going to be like going to like rave and like, it wasn't the kind of experience. There was going to be a lot of like take home value and nourishment. And I went in super nervous and scared and came out the other end super nourished and with like a lot of takeaways about my life, about my history, about my ancestry, about like what is my purpose here, and then also embedded core values from that experience into my actual business that I run today.
Was it an ayahuasca or was it a mushroom or peyote or does it even matter? Like,
yeah, it was actually, I haven't necessarily opened up about this publicly, but
oh, okay. It was one of the above, or maybe something else.
So it opened up like doors in my mind, actually opened up my perception of how I see specific things. And even like the time I spent with my son came up on that experience. And my takeaway from that was double down on these times, because like they're never going to come around again.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Before you hit record, we were kind of talking about, difficult challenges within a business. A lot of businesses right now are dealing on hard times. They have to make cuts. And you had some really good perspective on that. Why don't you share with our listeners, like, what is the question you ask when that time is coming up?
Yes. And then I'll talk about some other hiring process. But typically, I think the root of everything with employees stems from happiness. And when I walk into a one-on-one, typically my process is, are you happy? And that's a very vague question, but I actually want people to put an integer associated with their happiness, not using the number 7. So I'll typically say, can you just share, like, what's your happiness here? I'm curious, like 1 to 10, 10 being great, 1 being horrible. You can't use the number 7. It's a cop out. Because like people pick 7 as like, it's kind of like a number. So it's either they pick 6 or 8, or maybe if it could be worse, but maybe they go down further down the line and pick a 3 or 4. But they choose their happiness number, and we talk about their happiness. And typically, a lot of their performance issues stems from the happiness. So I'll say, hey, can you rate your performance here? 1 to 10 after that question. 1 being horrible, 10 being great, now using number 7. And if they rate their performance number a 6, it's like, how could you possibly be performing well here if you're not happy here? They're correlated, right? Your heart's not in it.
Do you get perspective on that happiness? Like if for me personally, I'm not drawn to happiness. I'm drawn to kind of like contentness. So I wouldn't like necessarily ever describe myself as like a quote unquote like happy person. So do you say like, where do you fall in normally in the happiness scale? And where are you at now?
That's actually a really good question. I like that addition. It's really, really good. Because happiness could be a chemical imbalance, right? It could be a moment in time. Like you can't be infinitely happy. So contentness, what's your typical contentness relative to now? Was that the addition that you added?
Well, I mean, if you're using happiness, I would say like, where are you typically on the happiness scale and where are you at now? With the understanding that, happiness is something that kind of moves up and down. Well, like every emotion too, but I would never expect to be at a 10 happiness. Like that's only like, right before that special moment with your wife.
Yeah. I was going to say just one thing I left out was that when they say, let's just say it's a 6, I do ask what gets you to a 10.
Yeah.
So I want to know what does get you to a 10. I know you're saying a 10 is unachievable, but in the grand scheme of things, I think like without like going too far down the rabbit hole, I think people get what I'm trying to get at, which is like,
right.
Are you happy here? If not, what would get you to your happiness level? And then what's your performance level? If you're a 6, what would get you to a 10? And like, if they can't be reconciled, right, there's not a whole lot of movement there. And that opens up opportunity for them and for us to discuss what are the next steps.
Yeah. And, we kind of talked about this. Is this done on a regular basis? Do you have like quarterly reviews, or is this done when you observe that someone is not performing to your expectations?
So I have often one-on-ones, which I probably have too frequently. But right now I'm in the weeds because I'm like in a startup and, we have only 14 people and I'm a big part of the company. But it's when I observe something potentially could be off. And it's harder remotely, in my opinion. But I try to suss out the experience on Zoom and try to get as close as I can to understanding this person as best as I can. And so if I feel something, I'll say something and we'll open up the conversation. I think that goes back to having positive friction. Like it's a crucial conversation that's required to get to the source and see if I'm blocking their growth or they're blocking our growth, or if we can actually grow together.
Yeah. What is usually the outcome for this? I know it depends and there's variabilities to it, but typically what do you see? Is there redemption for happiness and getting them on page, or is most likely going to be, what do they call that? When people get divorced and they got the different views on
irreconcilable differences?
Yes. I was never going to be able to say that word, but.
So I think that this opens the door to maximize potential. And so whatever potential exists after the conversation, it opens it up to. So if the next stage is like, hey, like we should look into like going separate ways, that's part of the conversation. Or it's like, it could be something that I did or something that I said or something that I'm not owning, or I didn't give you the right onboarding process, or you're overwhelmed, right? It's something about just speaking up and speaking your mind that I think a lot of people aren't able to do or don't like doing, and that's a consequence of many other things that are happening in society right now. But I want to have open conversations that can lead to positive outcomes. And even if the person leaves, that could be a positive outcome for them as well.
Yeah, it's challenging as a leader because there's things that you think in your head that you're thinking constantly. And sometimes I feel like, I'm going to speak for myself, but I feel like I say those things, but they're not always heard. But in reality, I may have just thought them in my head and never said them. And then I get mad when they're not in my head, So one of the things that I kind of believe in is like, I want to give team members more work than they can handle. Like, because the amount of work we can do is infinite, really. There's no amount we can't do. However, I want them to have their boundaries and to be clear communicators for, oh, this is too much, or this is pushing something down the road. And I feel like a lot of employees don't have that ability to push back and say, I can't handle that right now, or, this is taking precedent over me. Or if it does happen, it takes years and years and years of trust to establish that for employees. Like, how do you create a culture where they can be open, where they feel like they can, like express their pains and their problems that they have.
I think it's just by having these conversations, that's the start of it. I also don't think that like working for me is like working for a bigger company. So after the acquisition of Stubana, I worked for the bigger company and saw what it was like. So I'm giving people an opportunity that they've never had before, where they're able to speak their mind and they can make a massive impact that you can see from the moon. They just have to be willing to actually make an effort and put in the work. I'm trying to think like what else I do specifically to enable that. We have EOS meetings, level 10 meetings. I don't know if you've been exposed to that, but that certainly helps in the process because like everyone gets to contribute. Are you familiar with EOS at all?
Yeah, familiar with it. We've taken like nuggets from it.
Yeah.
For our style, but we don't follow it like by the book, I should say.
Yeah. I don't know. That's been my approach to managing people. And I can't say that I'm like incredible or amazing at it. I certainly love like the creative juices, like building a brand, getting things going. I like the 0 to 1, but the 5 to 10, for example, is a whole different speed. And I end up craving the 0 to 1 aspect of it. But I do like the human relationship aspect of it. And I think I do miss my days of being in office. Like those were some really cool, fun days of just like giving people high fives and ordering in food and going to the coffee shop and taking a walk together. But it's a trade-off with being remote and spending more time with family and also being like traveling. Like I've been on the road now for 2 months.
Yeah, I hear you with that. The one-on-ones you have, you said it was pretty regular. Is it like monthly?
Right now, it's weekly, actually.
Weekly? Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot. Typically, it's a half an hour. But I don't always start the conversation like that, right? Typically, I'll be like, hey, what's on the agenda today? I'll sometimes ask for the agenda in advance. But for the happiness one, that's one that comes out of nowhere, right? Typically, it's more or less
Right.
I bring it to the meeting. They think they're going to talk about their agenda. And I'll say, let's zoom out for a second. Let's have a real heart to heart. And, Jay-Z has this great quote that I love, which is real, recognize real. So like when someone is recognizing in you that, you're bringing authenticity, you actually care, you genuinely care and have an interest, then they're going to reciprocate that.
Cool. Let's, you started to share before we hit record was it the onboarding process that you have or the screening process?
It's a screening process. Yeah. So hiring is super weird, right? If you think about it, by the time it gets to my desk, I'm interviewing for the person for a half an hour. How do I know I'm making the right decision? You don't. I've made a lot of wrong decisions and I've ended up hurting a lot of people unintentionally. And I think at Stubana, like I probably have fired 100 people, but I had some really great people that were with us through the end and through the beginning. So now, probably, especially being remote, I've sort of changed up our process a bit. So first in the job description, typically, I'll put in a gold egg that will be like, hey, what's your favorite 90s band? If you've read this, please respond with your favorite 90s band. And suddenly, it weeds out a handful of the people that didn't actually pay attention to that requirement. But then we've always been doing assessment tests, both at Stubana and I now do it at Profasee. Now our assessment tests have evolved and changed over time. Like we used to have an assessment test at Stubana, had people log into our application and we had a README FAQ and had them answering some questions and we would grade them and have a Slack channel around the grades. Then I started using Test Gorilla for assessment tests for building my company and then realized that everybody was acing this test because of ChatGPT. So I found a test that was un-ChatGPTable, that was built around pattern recognition for recognizing autism. It's an IQ test. And I took some of those patterns and I used those to inform a creativity assessment that we have people take before they get to the first round interview.
So is that the one where you have like 3 blocks and then you have to guess what the fourth one is?
It's just like that. So it'll be like 3, 3, 3. And so it'll have one blank square and I'll show you patterns and you have to fill in what the blank pattern is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that something you buy then? Or
No, I just took it. I found something on the internet and I put it into type form and the type forms are now zapped into a spreadsheet and they're auto graded in the spreadsheet. And, my results on this was 5 of 6 and I didn't have the patience for the 6th one. So my criteria at least starts off at, I want people to get 6 of 6. And people are like, well, why are you holding people to a different criteria than you? And I'm like, look, I don't want to be the smartest person at the company. I want to hire the smartest people. And so sometimes I bend on the 6. Sometimes you can have 5 of 6, but I typically want someone to have like 5 out of 6 right on the quiz.
Yeah, I recently took one of those. Are they timed? They have to complete it in a certain period of time?
Not timed. No.
So they have unlimited access to it. And it's only 6 puzzles. I'm going to call them puzzles.
The 6 puzzles, and the first one's given to you. Like essentially, they actually tell you the answer, and you wouldn't believe how many people actually fail the first one.
Really?
Yes.
Send me the link after this. I want to see if I can get all 6. Or
Yeah.
An idiot.
Yeah, for sure.
You're going to be like, how does this guy have any kind of success in life? Get 2 of them right.
But like that's just like what I'm looking for. Just like my wife will be like, well, I would never work at a company that would do that. And I'm like, well, you're not working at my company, and that's it.
Because we've gotten some blowback from like third-party people. We do a Myers-Briggs personality test, which is not like you have to have a certain type of personality, but it just helps us understand your personality a little bit better. So it's just like a little more in-depth.
No, we do a personality.
Analysis.
We do personality too, by the way.
Yeah. Is that through Gorilla Test?
No, I do. Well, I've been using somebody else's culture index test. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it is personality traits. Essentially, they give you all these words and you identify which words associate with who you are. Okay. And the algorithm identifies roughly that specific individual. So at least how I found it to be helpful was like if I'm 50-50 on a candidate, they passed my interview, they passed this creativity quiz, they did the golden egg that was embedded in the job description, and we get through the calls and I'm like, I don't know. I'm like torn. The culture index for me has gotten me from 50-50 to 51-49 either way.
Yeah, so that's just another element of another data point in your decision process.
Yeah.
So the puzzle quiz, is that a requirement? You have to hit at least 5. If not, you have to hit 6 to work there?
Yeah, so it's funny you ask, right? Because I think if you looked at the people that I've initially hired at this company, none of them took the quiz, but the stage they've gotten higher. And so initially, without taking that quiz, it's just I'm looking for HIPPLs. I don't know if you ever heard of that word, HIPPLs, high potential entry level employees. So this is like raw talent that are high slope individuals who are quick learners. And I try to use intuition to identify those people in the beginning.
What's your hit rate?
When you say hit rate, like
how many stick around? Like how many did you get right?
Well, so let's just look at Profasee as an example. I'll give you an example. Like I can speak from experience. So my son has a babysitter. I come home one night and she's sitting there and I just was like, oh, like what are you up to? Like, what's your day job? What are you up to? And she's like, I'm like, I hate it. I'm a legal assistant. And I was like, oh, so like, what do you want to do in life? Like, and she says, I want to get into tech. And I don't know, I just had a good feeling about her. So she's still at the company. She runs sales, and she essentially is a very, very rapid learner. She can learn at scale and adapt. So I haven't actually had to, the only changes I've had to make on my team so far at Profasee have been on the developer side, which by the way, I'm not a developer. They're harder to read. And yeah, I made a few mistakes in the beginning.
How would you hire developers better?
Well, we have assessment tests that we built. So I'll have like someone who I really respect. Luckily, I came from Stubana, so I had some help, but we essentially were able to build some assessment tests for developers. So they do some code, they submit it, and then we check it over.
But they're not running that through ChatGPT?
That's a good question. I mean, well, actually, it would be ChatGPT. It would be Copilot, I think, through GitHub. But I haven't had to hire a new developer since the advent of this technology. So I might have to change our process.
What are your thoughts on that? Because on one hand, I think about, utilizing a tool that's available to you is a mark of talent and ingenuity. It wasn't a Bill Gates who said you want to hire like the laziest developer because they're going to figure out the quickest way to do something.
Yeah. I mean, I think, but I want people to be able to actually like code without using ChatGPT or without using Copilot. It takes critical thinking. And especially if you're like Profasee specifically, we're working on something that has never been done before. And it requires you to really think out of the box. And I don't think ChatGPT is at a point helping people to think out of the box just yet.
Yeah. Where can people support you, reach out to you, buy your products?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. I mostly post on LinkedIn, and I'll take my posts on LinkedIn. I know you're more of a Twitter guy, so I'll take my posts and I'll post them on Twitter. So I'm now starting to just get into Twitter, which is cool. I definitely lurk a lot on Twitter, by the way. I find some interesting posts on there and interesting viewpoints. I'm very glad that it's an open place where people can express themselves. When it comes to my business in general, especially if you're selling on Amazon, we've been building an AI-driven platform that changes price to maximize profit. We do this without sacrificing rank. And so we change pricing all with the intention, and it could be increasing price, it could be decreasing price. So it's like Uber surge pricing for Amazon brands. It's really the example I like to give. And it's called Profasee. We started building in December of 2021, way before the buzz around ChatGPT. And I've been like in an interesting intersection right now around AI specifically and profit, because we're now kind of going through the e-com winter, coming out the other side. So yeah, Profasee.com, check it out. I've been working on a SaaS mastermind called Deep and Sassy that I've been building. And so that is now live. And we just had our first mastermind last month. So if you're in SaaS and you like to go deep, it's a great place to collaborate with other people.
And that's Deep and Sassy, not Deep and Sassy.
Deep and Sassy. Yeah, SAASY, like SaaS.
All right, guys, this has been another e-commerce conversations. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks so much for having me.
And keep on growing.